Hi, colleagues. We're about to get started for our closing session. We have simultaneous interpretation in Arabic, Spanish, and French for this session. In the back left of the room, my left, you'll be able to pick up headphones for that simultaneous interpretation, and we should be getting kicked off momentarily.
The closing ceremony and the closing plenary of the Fragility Forum 2024 is part plenary and part town hall. What are you making notes on at the moment? Notebooks, the back of a program, your phones, tablets, whatever it is. I'm going to give you the 3 parts of the town hall so you know when to use the microphone over there, because it's a thematic town hall. All right, halfway through, we will start talking about, do we have a paradigm shift in the way development and the humanitarian sector work, right? That's part 1 of the town hall. Part 2 is, how do we work with the private sector in fragility, conflict, and violent situations? I know you've got so much to say about that, right? Microphone right there in the middle. That is part 2 of our town hall. The final part of our town hall, this is the bit that I love. We've been talking about this all of the time. One thing that you learned that you didn't know before you came to Fragility Forum 2024. That is a great way to end. If you're watching online, World Bank Live or C Event, you can also participate in the town hall. I know you have a moderator on World Bank Live in the room. I've given you a heads up so you know what to expect. Sitting on this tiny panel, Anna Bearday, Managing Director of the World Bank. Salah Ahmed Jama, Deputy Prime Minister of Somalia. Mirjana Spoljaric-Egger is the president of the ICRC. Daouda Coulibaly is founder and CEO of Sama Money. Adamasu Tedessa is the TDB Group President and Managing Director, brackets, Eastern and Southern Africa Trade and Development Bank, close brackets. Hiroshi Matano is the Executive Vice President of MIGA. It is so good to have all of you here. We are going to start on the stage. We're going to migrate into the town hall. Good luck to all of us. So, Anna, we started our forum. Takes a village. So, Anna, we started our forum looking at fragility, conflict, and violence, and the bank's focus on it, taking it into the mainstream. 3 days later, how much mainstreaming have you seen?
Thank you so much, and great to be back here on this stage and in this seat, even, I believe. First of all, I'm hearing an incredible amount of positive energy and buzz about the Fragility Forum this week. Everybody's talking about it. There's so many people here. There are people still connecting online. And there's been a lot of side conversations. There's been a lot of taking advantage of people being here to come together to discuss exactly this. How do we mainstream? How do we innovate? How do we adapt? So just a huge shout out to all of you for coming together and for creating this level of energy. Another reflection I have is that even in this very short period of time, 3 days, we have seen ups and downs. And up I want to share with you is that today, a couple of hours ago, our board discussed the new 4-year country partnership framework for Somalia. And I was very happy to have this discussion with our board. It was a very, very positive, constructive, supportive discussion of how the bank can operate in a very, very difficult context and how we can partner with, of course, the authorities, with stakeholders, with beneficiaries, but also the partnerships that it takes to make it happen. So that was very happy. Congratulations to my friend sitting next to me. But also in this very short period of time, just 3 days, and in fact today, we've seen more tragedy and more loss of life. So I think we also need to recognize that this is the world we live in, and it is one where one moment it's up with hope, as I said a few days ago, and another moment it's down with tragedy, and one can't help but feel a bit of despair. But this also is what makes our work so much more important. So a couple of points on mainstreaming, because I think it's important. First of all, I really feel, and I will probably come back to this, there isn't FCV work and non-FCV work anymore. And I feel that we need to recognize that the world at large globally is more fragile. And what we learn working in countries that may be classified as FCV is equally relevant for countries that are not classified, or countries that are not classified is equally relevant for countries that are, because the world is big and small at the same time. So I really feel that we have, out of necessity, moved into such a prominent part of our work in fragile and conflict-affected countries and situations that it's become mainstream by necessity, by operational mandate and imperative. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, because I do think we need to be able to pivot in and out. And I'll come back to what this means for the bank. Secondly, it's been great to see the innovation. And a lot of it is technology-based. If you look around at some of the booths here, what are we learning when we use satellite imagery, for example? What are we learning when there are apps in place for people and beneficiaries to communicate through? So I think the power of technology is so important. And I have to say, it sounds a bit cliche, but I have to come back to it. The focus on digitalization has to be at the forefront in all countries, and in particular in countries where we're trying to reach people. It is an inclusion agenda, it's a solution agenda, it is a practical agenda, because it allows people to transact with each other and keep themselves informed. And the third is, of course, we need money. We need money, we need money, we need money. But we also need the technical knowledge and the know-how of what works and what doesn't. And we need to be willing to fail. We need to be willing to try, and we need to be willing to fail. It is very hard to be right all the time and get the results you're looking for on the timeline you anticipate. And we cannot be discouraged. If it doesn't work, then we have to try something else. But let me come back to the money, because we do need the money. And here I have to say, again, IDA 19 and IDA 20 so far, $50 billion into FCV. IBRD, close to 30% of our commitments. This is what I mean by mainstreaming. So 40% of IDA commitments, 30% of IBRD commitments are going into countries that are fragile and conflict affected. This is our new business, but we don't have enough money. So my last point here, and now will actually be a shout out on what I'm going to be repeating over and over and over again, which is we need a strong IDA replenishment. We need your help, each and every one of you, to pick up IDA result stories that you like a lot. And this goes especially for our clients. How important is IDA? Because I really want to make sure we can walk into a strong replenishment that can help all the countries. But I'm walking away with a feeling of optimism that we can solve difficult problems. When I get hit by despair, I quickly have to pick myself up and say, now I need to work even harder. So I'll leave it at that.
Deputy Prime Minister, when you write notes down, are they classified? I'm wondering, because I would really love to know what you've been writing right now. No, not we. We would like to know.
Well, I was just drawing some random things to help me think.
Share your random thoughts, please.
Well, first of all, I really would like to thank the World Bank and its partners for organizing this forum. It is such an enriching environment where people with different roles and responsibilities in this global agenda are able to share their perspectives. So it's been a truly learning experience for me, and this is my first visit to Washington, D.C., and I might be frequenting a bit more than I planned earlier. I drew a triangle of fragility, conflict, and violence. And then I put two pillars down, humanitarian and development modalities, and the need to connect all these things. On an everyday basis, I work with some very, very dedicated humanitarian workers in Somalia. I was just talking to the president of the ICRC how in the last floods we had to transport boats to the inter-riverine regions as the river of Jubba and Shabelle were getting flooded. And people were at the risk of losing their lives and livelihoods. So we had to transport these little boats that are 6 meters long to faraway places, because some of the regions in between are occupied by Al-Shabaab. And I must recall one story in which a little village near the district of Lugh, 4,500 people were stranded in water. And the availability of a simple boat that had to be transported from Mogadishu to Baidabo and then to Kismayo saved the lives of those people. It's a very simple exercise. So sometimes we seem, those of us coming from the regions, we seem to be a bit critical of the actors that work on humanitarian issues, but that's not the case. They are fulfilling their mandate. Their mandate is to save lives and to respond. The failure is in the preparedness and preventive aspects of our work. So that's one issue I would like to highlight. The World Bank has done a research on a group of 16 to 17 countries that are increasingly appearing on the top list of countries that always need humanitarian assistance. Somalia is one of those. Some of the Sahel countries are one of those. Yemen is one of those. So now there is a recurring pattern that this is not something that is going away. Perhaps it is about time to look at the root causes and the intersectionalities of these problems and different variables at play. I really appreciated some of the agreements we reached yesterday, and I hope they're documented, that working on climate finance is working on development issues. In the light of these massive and interconnected challenges, it is very important that the actors, ranging from the World Bank, the UN, NGOs that are really on the ground and doing a good work, civil society, and the states agree on one thing. We often talk about money and the need to have finances. I guess before it's one thing to have resources, it's another to be resourceful. Before money is a human-made product. But before that, we need to agree on the mindset and the direction. When I was a little kid, I was taught about the difference between velocity and speed. And one of the distinctions that the scientists told me, I don't know if I agree with them, was that one has a direction, and that's what distinguishes speed from velocity. You could go in circles and drive at 100 kilometers per hour. You could also go 100 kilometers per hour in a particular direction. If we get the direction right, money would follow. In the case of Somalia, for the last 32 years, there was one variable missing. That was the role of the state. The universities, the schools, the health centers were all run by non-state actors. A lot has been achieved, but there's a glass ceiling as to what can be achieved without the availability of a viable state institutions. The enrollment rate of school-going children in Somalia is around 30%. Access to health, the need for health workers in Somalia is about 100,000, and we only have about 11,000. So you can see the room for growth. Humanitarian efforts do not focus on institutional building, organizational building, and resourcing long-time projects, or programs rather. They are short-paced interventions. That's where a dialogue between practitioners of development and humanitarian actors in collaboration with the states could be a very useful discussion that would make our lives easy. Let me keep my remarks to that for now.
Do not turn your microphone off. just leave it on for the rest of this plenary session so that anytime you want to add something, you don't even have to change that button. Makes it nice and easy for you. I'm really curious, Adamasu, about what you're thinking right now, because I know as the Deputy Prime Minister was speaking, there was a thought that came into your head. It was about a 30-second thought. Please share it with us.
I was going to take the Fifth Amendment and not incriminate myself for thinking too much on what was being said. Well, we are a diversified and specialized financial services provider in many contexts where there is fragility, conflict, and violence, mostly in the Eastern and Southern African region of Africa. And we've got a lot of experience around how to step in and take risk in these very difficult environments. And we've also been very fortunate to have strong partnerships that allow us to do that in larger scale. And it's been a very interesting trajectory for us, because now, over and above providing commercially oriented trade finance to SMEs and corporates, we're now getting into the climate finance space as well to deal with some of the root causes that the good Deputy Prime Minister was talking about, because the root causes is about adaptation, it's about infrastructure to ensure that you can actually deal with these underlying causes. But in the final analysis, when you're on the ground, like we are, and you're providing financial services in an environment that is very much characterized by high risk, the question is, who's prepared to really go beyond the talk and do what needs to be done? And in that regard, it's not because I'm here in the building, but I'm very happy to count the World Bank Group today as a very strong partner, which wasn't the case 4 or 5 years ago. Just in 4 or 5 years, I've seen a sea change in the possibility of partnership with this very fine institution, allowing us to scale up. We do the same with the private sector in Europe, but very much with African capital as our base. And of course, now the question is, how can we rise up and respond to some of the new challenges that are going to come out of countries like Somalia, where they're going to need more than humanitarian finance, but more, fit-for-purpose financing for the private sector, for their banks, who need bridges to the rest of the world. One of the things that we don't always understand is the extent of the dichotomies in our region. On the one hand, you'll have very, very important forums like this, and the world wants to find a way to be much more responsive. But on the other hand, you get global regulations coming in, making it very, very difficult for financial institutions to work in these types of environments. So you have a lot of commercial banks globally withdrawing and actually doing less. So this is an opportunity to put the spotlight on some of these dichotomies. I'm fortunate enough to be in one institution that at least is still a bridge, not just with the global financial institutions, but even commercial banks, Standard Chartered, HSBC, Citibank. These are our partners. But the truth of the matter is not many can enjoy the services of these global financial institutions because there's a fear of risk. And in the end, it all boils down to appetite, right? If you talk about it, but if you don't have the appetite to do it, it remains theoretical.
I love that you mentioned that fear of risk, because I'm about to introduce you to the bravest businessman on the African continent, in my opinion. Daouda, I would like you to tell us about your business in Mali and how you're managing to operate it in a country that is quite clearly in a fragile state.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to express my congratulations to the World Bank Group for the success of this Fragility Forum. And also, I would like to say thank you for having me. Fragility runs deep in countries we live and work in. In Sahelian countries, these countries are exposed to multiple challenges at climate, political, and humanitarian deteriorating situation. But despite these challenges, a nascent ecosystem of innovation start appearing in the Sahel region, in which Mali is considered as a frontier market. Sama Money is a fintech company we launched in Mali in 2020, driven by the firm belief that in the impactful opportunities offered by the digital innovation. Our commitment, let's say, our mission is to truly address the critical challenge of financial inclusion by targeting the segment of those populations who are unbanked and who live mainly in rural zones in Mali and in the Sahel zone. And our commitment is to try to leverage digital solutions to bridge the gap because these rural zones are empty in terms of traditional financial systems. So at Sama Money, addressing fragility for us is part of our DNA. It's our mission statement. We aim to provide financial services to people who feel excluded from the traditional financial system. And we work with women, we work with youth, we work with displaced people, forcibly displaced persons, specifically in the conflict-affected zones of Mali, for example. Those areas where our competitors struggle to reach or to avoid because of security risk. But I believe as an African company for all Africans, it's our commitment, it's our mission to try to innovate, to develop innovative solutions, innovative mechanisms to reach these most vulnerable group of society and help them build resilience.
What was the best day of your working life in your mobile banking company, and what was the worst day?
I will maybe start by the worst and finish by the best.
See, I was being not a journalist by asking the best, and yet he takes me to the worst, which is good because I like that too. Go ahead.
Because I want people to keep the best, so I will finish with the best.
Good thinking, I like that.
Thank you. Typically, this day when we started Sama Money in Mali, we had a lot of difficulties with to develop the network, the distribution network, because our competitors were telling our future partners that they should not trust this company because it's a local company. How can they trust this company which arises from nowhere? And if they put their money in Sama Money, they could be sure to lose it. And this situation really created many difficulties for us to start our business. But thanks to God, finally, with our first partners who trusted us, we were able to start this business. And today, we have more than 20,000 point of sales, which are mainly local micro dealers, independent micro dealers, all across the country.
And the best day is the best day today? No.
No.
I need to try harder. Thank you so much. We're going to move on, but we'll come back to you in the big town hall. Really appreciate
Thank you.
Thank you.
But the best thing, if you allow me.
Of course, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just when the day we started to make cash payments for some international organizations like the Food and Agriculture Organization, like the UNICEF, and also like the Social Nets program of the World Bank, we really realized that our service has real impact. And from that day, we really feel very, very useful, truly useful. And it's a place for me to thank the World Group Bank for their confidence. And also, I would like to take the opportunity to say thank you to IFC, with which we have started some partnership. And Mali is a very difficult, a very hard, specific FCV zone, and I would like the World Bank to try to consider Samamoni as a key player in this zone and a key partner in this zone, and to see how you can still continue to support us. Thank you.
Miriana, one of the opportunities like a forum like this is that the convening host can say, how can we do our work better? How can we help you do your work better? So if we think about the humanitarian crises around the world and development organizations like the World Bank, and you can speak directly to the World Bank and to other development organizations who are watching, who are participating in this forum, what do you need from them?
Thank you. And let me just start by saying how happy I am to be here. And Anna, to hear from my colleagues that you mentioned the work that we do together in your opening statement. And since I'm here at the closing panel, I want to tell you why it's so important and why I think we should reinforce our cooperation. You mentioned mainstream. The ICSC is with just under 20,000 staff active in 100 situations of conflict around the globe. I mean, talk about mainstream. In many places where we are, in theory, the World Bank is also active. In many places where we are, nevertheless, and I traveled to the north of Mali as my first mission when I joined the ICSC, I see the ICSC and few others, and sometimes I don't see anybody else than the ICSC and the National Red Cross, Red Crescent Society. And the reason is because in many parts where we work, because we are the neutral, independent institution, we work in areas that are not controlled by the state. 195 million people, in our estimates, work in non-government controlled areas. We know from Sarah Cliff and her team's work that roughly 500 million live in contexts that are not supported by traditional donors because governments or the authorities are not in line with their own policies. And that poses challenges. Every time a conflict reignites or a conflict starts, we at the ICSC, even though we are a humanitarian organization meant to bring assistance and protection to people in situations of armed conflict, we know every time that we are there and we will stay for a long time. But that's not what we want. My growing concern is that humanitarian assistance is becoming a distraction. It's becoming a distraction from a lack of sustainable development measures and development planning, interlocutors that would engage in this longer-term development vision, but most of all, a lack of skin in the game by the political leaders to sit down and negotiate political solutions that would allow for development to start. In the meantime, with very little funds and reduced funds, we are meant to prevent the collapse from basic services because we want to sustain the development gains as long as possible through a conflict and a protracted conflict. But also because from a human perspective, we want to prevent a humanitarian fallout that nobody would be able to mitigate. Now, we understand why governments don't intervene in certain situations or stay away from cooperating with certain actors at certain times. We understand that the World Bank country to us is politically governed. And you will not be able to do certain things while we can, because we talk to everyone in the private sector across the board. We talk with 350 armed groups across the globe, because we have to reduce the costs of war. We have to invest in prevention with all the means that we have. And to do that, we have to engage with everyone. It's our mandate. Now, what I want to say is that, and we have started this with the World Bank very successfully, and we want to engage more in this direction, is that we have to recognize each other in our respective mandates. The question is not how we become better in development because nobody else is there. The question is, how can we throughout engage with the World Bank to prepare the World Bank to come in and take over? Because you've been there in conversation with us from the outset, even though you cannot directly intervene, with the aim of handing over to you as quickly as possible, because what we want, Deputy Prime Minister, is for humanitarians to be able to go elsewhere where we are more urgently needed and see development happen. So it's not about coordination. It's not about partnerships as much as it is knowing each other throughout the process, building coalitions and recognizing that the world is a complex place. No single organization will be able to cover the spectrum. No single organization will have the silver bullet. The more we sit down on an ongoing basis and know and trust each other, the more we can pool our resources. It's the only way out. And at the end of the day, unless we invest in prevention, we won't be able to cover the cost anymore.
I feel like Miriana has got us started off in the first section of our town hall. Be thinking about this, because when I come back to you in about 4 minutes' time, Hiroshi, I want you to be standing there behind that microphone about the paradigm shift. Is one needed between the way the development and the humanitarian sector work together? Miriana, we'll come back to you because you can lead that bit of the town hall. But if you're itching to say something, I heard a yes or a whoa or something happening out here that I would love to hear back on the microphone so we can share your expertise with everybody. Hiroshi, I love what you said to me earlier today, which was you were surprised by some people who are ready to invest in fragile countries. What's the surprise, and who are they?
Well, thank you for the introduction. Just a quick kind of note. MIGA is part of the World Bank Group, does provide guarantees. Together with IFC, we help the private sector in investing in these challenging settings. Just to follow up on your discussion, I think the matter of fact is that unless we achieve a sustainable development, we don't have a solution. And to have a sustainable kind of development, we do need private sector partners into the mix. So I think all the things that we've been talking today come together at some point. My job is really to facilitate that through our guarantee programs. So we've been doing that. But through this experience, what I found, and we're really surprised, is that actually there are a lot of funds or people who are willing to engage, enter into these challenging situations. So, it was a very great kind of experience that you shared with us, both of you, about how they're willing to engage. But there's a lot of people that I saw over the past few years that are really thinking about that. One is an experience that we had in the Somalia renewable project. We did close that last year. It's a relatively small project, 5 million or so. But that wasn't only the case. We recently closed a distributed power project in DRC. We are closing yesterday or the day before a project in Nigeria, also in the northern part of Nigeria. So these are the people that are actually doing this are impact funds, and they're very young people, actually, sophisticated people. They know what to do. They're using technology. One of the miracles that we are experiencing is that because of the price of the solar panels and all those good things are becoming more affordable, it is possible to deploy that. And people are taking advantage of those kind of new technologies, new thinking, and they're not people like me, the older age. It's really younger people, 20, 30 years. So through my kind of, been doing this for about 4 or 5 years, but I really am surprised. It is a different kind of people, financial, very smart, sophisticated people. But for us, for me, it's really how can we help them grow to do this in scale. And that's really, we're thinking about expanding a guarantee program, but it's one of the aims of our intent of doing this is how can we help these kind of new actors to be part of the whole story of development. So actually, I'm very encouraged to listen to all these new ideas.
Is it, Hiroshi, do you think it's because when you get older, you know what the risks are, and you become a little bit more, oh, if I do this terrible thing's going to happen to me. When you're 20, nothing bad's going to happen to you, and you're not going to die.
Well, maybe. There's truth to some part of that. Looking at my children, yes, I feel that. But that said, it is a risk, and they're using funds or a lot of there's investors out there, so they need to make a good case about is a reasonable, manageable risk. But that's where the engagement of the World Bank Group or all the interventions that we collectively do helps them. If you have a support of the World Bank Group, I think it gives some kind of message to people. So I really believe that there's a role that we all can play in the mix for development.
A role we all can play means that if you want to talk about the humanitarian and development sector and you would like to do it in the next few minutes, the microphone is there. We're going to be moving on pretty quickly. But Mariana, let me just go back to you because you kind of started us thinking in a different way. It's like we shouldn't be hanging out here all of the time. We need to move on. So is it needed to be the way that development and humanitarian sectors work together? Do we need to throw out the old model?
Look, we have two different tasks. One is to promote respect for international humanitarian law. And the consequence of respect for international humanitarian law is the reduction of the cost of war, is the shortening of the period of recovery and returning to development once there is a ceasefire agreement. It's also maintaining that pathway back to peace through our neutral intermediary role. But what our reality today is a prevalence of assistance. We stay in countries like in Syria for 10 years, work with the water authorities to ensure access to water to a population, and because that country cannot get spare parts in, and it's extremely difficult to maintain the system. We can do it because we are neutral and we are benefiting from humanitarian carve-outs from the sanctions. Now, we are not questioning the sanctions. But then we get criticized for doing development. It's not development. It's preventing a humanitarian fallout whilst development cannot resume. So what we have done with our new strategy adopted for 2024 till the end of 27 is to define us clearly as humanitarians, not because we don't want to continue doing what development actors would do in normal settings, but to be able to go to Anna then as the president of the ICRC and say, how can I, as the humanitarian bridge between security and development, work with you as the development bank? And I think we should stop competing in a time that is becoming so increasingly complex. What I want is cooperation and an optimization of our scarce resources. You don't swim in money, and neither do I. So we have to find solutions. We have to come together to find better solutions instead of coming together and think hey, we can raise more money. I know we have to, but it's about, finding that interface that we've been talking about for decades and haven't been able to define. Thank you.
So how much trouble will I get into if I come back to the managing director of the World Bank after I've gone to the gentleman at the microphone? So please go ahead, be swift, and I'll come right back to you.
Yeah, I will be. So thank you so much, Clinton, World Vision, Syria Response. So thank you so much for just mentioning Syria. One thing I want to challenge the panelists on, and actually this entire event, is we haven't really discussed geopolitical space that's contested. So the entire assumption of the forum is there is a government who can take on services and then provide. But most of us who work in really fragile contexts, there's no government. And so what do we do as humanitarian and development actors in those spaces, particularly where banks are not willing to come in and invest? One of our biggest struggles in Syria right now, in northern Syria in particular, is we only have humanitarian aid that's almost all gone. And so we have massive issues with providing water, nutrition, livelihoods, everything. We're in trouble, and there is no donor who's stepping in to take over the humanitarian space that's being left. And we have millions of people in crisis. Now in Syria, there's over 16 million people who are in desperate need of humanitarian assistance, and we're not getting it. So it's great that we can talk about governments, but when you don't have them, what on earth do you do? Thank you.
So great, I think a very, very great and important point. And there's an in-between too, where you have government, but really hard to reach areas, and you still want to reach those areas. What do you do in those situations too? So the experience we have is that this is where you really have to work with partners, and you have to work with a variety of partners. We are working in countries where we don't have huge amount of footprint and where we are not relying on the government, but we're really relying on a third party. It can be a UN agency, it can be an international NGO, it can be a local NGO, it can be a combination of all three. And I think that's what we need to map out and try to do our very best. Syria is particularly complicated. We are, for example, in Afghanistan through IMPART, we are working with partners there, and we are working also both with NGOs and the UN agencies, and I think this becomes very important. But there is something we call authorizing environment, and it's a complicated thing. It gets to your geopolitical question, and it is, at the end of the day, a reality that we also deal with, because we look at what is the ability for us to work, how much conducive environment will we have that the projects can be implemented, who's on the ground. And then I think what Mirjana was saying is it is important that we distinguish between humanitarian and development, although the way the world is right now, we're pretty stuck in the short-term humanitarian and relief because the world is such that there are a lot of people in need. But one thing I wanted to say was what Mirjana and I did very early on was, and it was really Mirjana calling me saying, look, I need to talk to you about some specific countries. I want to get really specific. And I think that specificity helped us chart out how do we make sure ICRC at some point moves on and an institution like the World Bank or our partners can move in. And I think it's important we can talk how conceptually it can work, but I think it's important to sometimes also try it out in one or two countries. And I appreciated that she got very practical about it and said, here are a couple of countries where we would like to see if we can move on or move into another area if development can pick up.
Deputy Prime Minister, you're looking very thoughtful. Can you put those thoughts in about 30 seconds for me, please?
That would be one thought. Actually, I do not want to go back to the humanitarian dimension of the discussion, but that's where you're heading. One issue on that is we really have to appreciate the differences in the localities. Syria, Afghanistan, Niger, Mali, Somalia, Ethiopia, Yemen are not the same. The different contestations, the different levels of gains in terms of security are different. So let's not develop an overarching framework for very distinct entities at play.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. I'm going to move on because we've got some more questions. Yes, go ahead, please. Or more thoughts.
Hi, my name is Mary Apollo. I'm originated from South Sudan, and also I'm leading the Young African Youth in the Diaspora. I have one comment and two more questions.
You have one comment.
I have one comment.
That's,
telling
yes.
the story
one
of
comment.
fragility. When you talk about fragility, I think there is a missing point on talking about fragility, that we don't discuss the issue with the local community themselves. How do they feel about that, and what is fragility mean to them? Because if you take the case of Sudan, for a long time, people have been marginalized. They have been going through that, I think, and then now, when South Sudan became an independent country, the scenario repeats itself again. So I think if we went back and talked to those local people, and they're telling us our concern, we should have a measurement for the conflicts that we are going through right now. The question is, how can we engage the young population, the young people in these issues? We had the discussions with the government entity, nonprofit organization, but what about the young people? Do you think that we need intergenerational dialogue, or we should provide them with access to programs, and we bring them in these programs?
Mary, can I bounce this back to you, because with all wonderful due respect of our amazing plenary lineup, I believe you're the youngest, right?
Yeah.
So can you answer your own question? You can, right?
I can.
Go ahead.
Actually, there is a lot of, I'm a youth themselves. I start my initiative, and I know a lot of young people who are starting initiative themselves, especially here in the diaspora, and using the resources that they have by themselves to make this work back home, and it's difficult. And I think here, this is a point that I'm highlighting it to you. That is a point that we need to talk about. This institution need to design this program or support this young people initiative like myself.
Mary, thank you
so we can
much
move forward.
For your
Thank
voice.
you so much.
Thank you. You build a door if you need to get into the room. All right. Yes, go ahead.
It was a great panel, very strong insights and initiatives that you're leading towards fragility. And so owing to the theme of the forum, which is adapting and innovating in a volatile world, and looking at it from a global scale, I'm wondering that because of the number of crises that have been taking birth recently and the frequency of it, and how each crisis in a different region has its own course of action, its own shape, and how it impacts. Do you think there can be feasible initiatives to keep these initiatives that are towards the resilience, towards maintaining resilience, or towards relief in these countries to be scalable so that they can be used by other countries, or in a future time when there's another, perhaps possibility of crisis? And I just wanted to know your thoughts on how it's feasible and if there are any initiatives being done in this regard. Thank you.
Anna, do you want to take that one?
I'll just say a few things. I think this is an important point. What can we learn from one crisis to another that we can replicate quickly, because it turns out to be very effective? And I think there are a couple of things that we have learned along the road. And let me just mention two. One is when we're thinking about who can we work with, I think we need to be very open-minded and very practical, because at the end of the day, we want to get services where they are needed, initially for humanitarian, but then for relief, and then for recovery. So it kind of goes in it's a continuum. The one thing I think we have also learned is that you cannot exclude government. Even if government has low capacity, we have to make sure we also help build that capacity. That can be central government, it can be local government. And usually there is a role for government and there's a role for non-government actors, and that's something we've learned. The other thing I think is very important in resilience is the institutional building side. So we have to work proactively to build institutions. This is probably, in my almost 30 years of development now, the most important work we can do. When you're investing in infrastructure, invest also in the institutions behind the infrastructure. When you're investing in health system, invest in the institution behind the health system. When you're investing in education, invest in the institution behind. Because those institutions have to be able to withstand the toughest of times. They may go down, but we need to build on something, and I think that's very important.
The last thought from the floor. Thank you.
So my name is Juliet Adams, and I'm from the Frederick Press. We are a thought organization. And I'm listening, and I was not going to speak, but I have to speak. One factor that we need to integrate in this conversation is power. We have to take into consideration the military complex. And that's what we are touching on. We see all the wars that's taken place. We know the military. The U.S. spends nearly $1 trillion in their budget. And we see the wars that are taking place right now. We see the issue in terms of the ceasefire and the votes at the UN. So my question is, how are we going to speak to the military complex? How are we going to speak to the U.S. that has a veto vote at the UN and also at the World Bank?
Who would you like to answer that very difficult question? Pick anybody you like. They will answer it. They're so happy you asked that easy question in the last 60 seconds of this plenary. Please, choose.
Thank you for bestowing me with that power, and I have to ask a woman, and it's going to be the woman right in front of me.
Congratulations, Mariana.
Thank you. It's not really a surprise, because we do speak to military powers and we do speak to world leaders. But fortunately, I'm not saying what we talk about, and we don't reveal what we say, because we have to remain confidential to be able to keep that path open. But what I said before is important. You know, we have to keep that pathway back to peace, because people don't want to live off humanitarian assistance. They want to have options. They want to see development. We just keep the space going. We prevent systems from collapsing so that development actors can come back. And while they cannot come back, we have to maintain the dialogue with them, and we have to figure out how to shorten that time. But fact is, if we can make war as human beings, if we can decide to make war, we can also decide to make peace. I'm ending every intervention nowadays by calling on state leaders to not make conflict the norm, but peace the norm, and ultimately the goal of their actions. Because otherwise we will just, see more and more suffering, and we see too much nowadays, and we are beyond what a human being should be able to absorb in civilian casualties. Thank you.
The Fragility Forum started on the 27th of February. It ends on the 29th of February, a leap year date. I am wondering, Hiroshi, on the 26th of February, what did you not know that you now know today? In a sentence.
This is a cliche maybe, but my job is to managing risk. So all the talk that comes to my side from my team is what happens in the world, what's happening in that country, in this region. There's a coup there, there's something else there. And the frequency of that, unfortunately, as you mentioned, is increasing. But people getting together, having these conversations, asking tough questions, trying to answer those. You call it hope, but it is. There is a good thing in this conversation that we getting together, having these kind of things. We're not perfect, but we do have a series of tools that maybe can prevent or help recovering from that situation. So I'm proud that we are part of the story. But as Anna mentioned, it is really that we need to work together. I realize that again. So I'm really appreciative of the opportunity of listening to this and being part of the party. Thank you.
Damasu, what have you learned in the last 3 days?
Well, apart from the dichotomies that stare us in the face, I was quite pleased to see that mainstream institutions seem to be much more willing to be flexible, to be more innovative, to be more responsive in this fragile space, which is usually an orphan, right? In my business, I tend to see a lot more funding going to emerging markets, sometimes frontier markets, but never fragile markets. So it's a very good sign for me that I can roll up my sleeves and expect more partnerships to do more in this very complex space. And innovation is the order of the day, simple as that.
Dauda, you look like you were praying there for a moment. Praying for the end of this plenary.
Yeah, of course. I learned a lot of things during this Fragility Forum. The fact to gathering so many wonderful people, all interested by the FCV question, creates a great framework to discuss deeply about this subject. But in this room, I just realized through the lady's question about the military. I just figured out that most of the countries affected by FCV-related questions are under military leadership. I just figured it out. So I think she has given me a new subject to study, because it's really interesting, important. I'm not judging about what a military regime could be, but I think many countries today affected by FCV are under military management, military leadership. So I'm going to look at this subject. Thank you so much. This is one of the things I've learned here. Thanks to you. Thank you.
Mariana, I think it's quite an arrogant question for me asking you, what did you not know on the 26th of February that you now know on the 29th of February? What a grand question to even ask. Do you have an answer?
What I'm surprised to see is how, even though we have, or I find myself in a role now with a very unique mandate in the world, but what I saw again today is no matter where you come from different sectors and different parts of the world, at the end of the day, we struggle with the same phenomenon, and we just call it differently. but I feel comfortable in this conversation because I think ultimately we want to, come to the same result, which is restoring dignity for the people. And I think what I've also learned in that sense is that there is much more courage in the room to address the core problems that are preventing us from that. And I think the forum was very frank, and we need such formats, especially here at the World Bank, because we cannot, distract ourselves by reducing ourselves to our own field of activity and our own jargon and comfort zone. And by opening up, as the World Bank has done over the last 3 days, you not only prove that the world is complex, but you also prove that even though it's complex, we have to try to find solutions. And I want to commend the bank and Anna and everybody involved for this. Thank you.
Deputy Prime Minister, you have such a thoughtful face. I'm always thinking that some amazing lecture is going to come out of your mouth when you sit there like this. I'm excited to hear what you didn't know 3 days ago that you now know at this moment.
Well, as we grapple with these questions in first-hand experience back home, I'm more than delighted to know that there are more actors other than Somalis in Somalia or those that work with us on an everyday basis that are thinking about a similar problem. And as we were talking about institutions, NGOs, states, banks, I'm also very glad and humbled to know that the power of the individual and the human can be more important than institutions at times. So in our obsession with structures, perhaps we're forgetting about the role for agency. And the last statement made by the lady that spoke on that microphone, Juliet, was more powerful than what we all had to say. It is the prevention of conflict that is the most basic intervention we can have before we can respond to crisis. As a society, Somalis that have been in various forms of conflict, we truly understand what the people of Gaza and elsewhere are going through today. And I think it will need collective effort from all of us. One final point, that is my takeaway. What I would like others to take away from me is a very simple analogy here. If we take the whole intervention portfolio as a pie chart, and we look at the different types of interventions to improve the livelihoods, the dignity of people, and help them survive. If the portfolio is 80% humanitarian, 20% institutional, 2% private sector and job creation, then we have a problem. If you come back every year and we're looking at a portfolio that is tilted upside down, we'll have a problem. So if we can get it to 15% humanitarian, 30-40% institutional building and resilience, and maybe 40% productive sector activities, that would create jobs. So what I was thinking about the whole day is, how can I get about 10,000 factories that would employ as many people as that are sitting here, about 250 to 300. If that is not the direction, then we really would be disappointing the people in need. So thank you.
So Anna, I'm going to ask you to do something different, which is we are in the closing plenary, and I would like you to wrap up your thoughts about how you would like to end the closing plenary of the Fragility Forum 2024. Please.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks again to the panelists. This gets more interesting by the minute, so I do wish we had more time because I think we're starting to get into some of the real issues. But if it's one thing I feel like I'm left with, That is that we need, and maybe this is one of the things also coming out of this forum, but it's certainly coming out of this conversation, we need a prevention compact. Because at the end of the day, we have become very reactive. And that is really a sign from many of the questions that came up, certainly the last one, but also the question of, where is local community, where is youth? And if we think more holistically about what it will take to prevent conflict and think about who are the actors who need to work on different parts of it, because there are different actors. Not all the actors are even in this room right now. So we need to think about that, and I would very much like us to think about a new, maybe that's a paradigm shift, a new paradigm. We need a prevention compact that allows us to work less on responding, because by the time you're responding, there's just too much tragedy and despair that has taken place. That's one thing. The other thing I want to wrap up with is there's a whole lot more appetite for risk than we think. And I think we've seen that during these 3 days, and we've even heard it. And even I have been, I work on the IBRD IDA side of the World Bank, but I spend a whole lot of time now with Hiroshi, Formiga, and Mokhtar and the team at IFC. They're doing some amazing things in some of the most fragile settings in the world. It's amazing. It takes sometimes a bit longer, sometimes even shorter. So I think we have to recognize there's an appetite out there for more risk than we think it is. We shouldn't assume the private sector will not come. You cannot attract, you cannot do. I think we should start with you can do, and let's learn from what happened in CAR, or let's learn from what happened in Burundi most recently, or let's learn from what's happening in Somalia and other places around the world. And my third point is actually one of what I'm really left with here, which is endurance. Endurance because we can never give up. Because the moment we give up and say these countries are too difficult or it's not worth it, we're actually giving up on humanity, and we cannot do that. And I want to actually come back to a place I started, which is thanking the staff and all the people who work in this part of the world on these issues, because it takes risk-taking every day. It takes thinking that I'm going to get something good out of this, and I'm going to come back tomorrow and work on it again. And it takes being really patient and having that endurance. If it's one thing that I feel we really need to do, and I need to do, is to make sure that all of you who work on the most difficult places around the world get the visibility and the recognition and the support that you need. And I personally feel it's the most rewarding work you can do. In my career in the bank, I've worked on all kinds of countries, all kinds of settings, but the most rewarding are the most difficult. But we need to make sure we continue the continuum there and say, okay, now what? How do we make sure we get the resources, the solutions, the support that is needed for the front line where we can make the most difference? So that's where I'm coming out. Let's start work anew on a prevention compact involving actors and partners that need to be there. Let's recognize that the risk-taking is actually much greater than we think it is, and let's use it. And thirdly, let's be appreciative of everyone on the front line who works in the most difficult places for their endurance. And for people like myself, let's make sure we back them up and support them each and every day. Mm.
So we have 8 minutes left of the Fragility Forum 2024. You're thinking, what could possibly happen in 8 minutes? You're about to be impressed, okay? Because during the last 3 days, we have been making a video. If you see yourself, your friend, or your colleague, you can ululate if you want to. I expect to hear applause. You can do a little bit of stamping as well, but also listen out to the comments that will happen in the closing video. We can practice our applause by thanking the closing plenary speakers in the way that you do best. Thank you, speakers. And now, as we exit the stage, the closing video.
And violence group at the World Bank. Hello, I'm Sukaina Khan, the Director of the Fragility, Conflict and Violence Group at the World Bank. More than 5,000 people have come together from across the globe, both virtually and in person, to delve into our central theme, innovating and adapting in a volatile world. We've been able to tackle tough questions, from climate change to criminal violence, prevention, and forced displacement. We've been energized to hear innovative ideas on how to increase resilience and build institutions through harnessing digitalization and technology, leveraging private sector, closing the data gaps. We've heard from diverse voices, athletes, artists, writers, humanitarian, entrepreneurs. I hope you've been re-energized with this discussion and you will go back to your office like me with a renewed sense of purpose on how we could turn these great ideas into action.
All the people who have lost lives and lost loved ones, there are too many of them, they're all over the world. So if you join me just in a few moments of acknowledging and paying our respects.
We've got to hit the main themes, which are lessons learned, resilience, middle-income countries, the private sector, and be interesting and engaging at the same time. No pressure.
It is important that countries that are facing violence and conflict bring their voices to the table.
It's a mistake. When we say, let's do first humanitarian assistance, let's then move to development, and hopefully by then we have a peace process. We need to be aware of how do we do our calculations, how do we prioritize, and when do we start development.
Partnership is a very important principle for the United Nations, particularly in fragile, conflict-affected and violent settings. We count the World Bank as one of our very important partners in those settings, and we need to leverage our comparative advantages in these very complex situations.
More should be done to integrate private sector approaches to either resolving the conflicts or resolving market issues within the conflicts.
Internally displaced people are indeed sort of chronically invisible. I think there's a range of explanations for that, and we have to address them. In part, we have no forum to discuss internal displacement, and because indeed in their own countries, often they're not necessarily a high priority for their own governments, and so we're working with governments to make sure that we reverse that trend.
Throughout our discussions in the forum, it was important to shed light on the rising tensions that are taking place in Lebanon as a result and a reflection of the rising tensions in the region. A lot of that is going to reflect on more fragility in our social fabric and our economic situation.
Most importantly, if we don't get into these conflicts, then we develop much faster. We don't have the casualties of war, but also the negative effect it has on the economy.
The VR experience, it was incredible. Oh my.
Haven't seen anything like it, and definitely is bringing something new to technology in the world. So it was amazing.
What does fun have to do with conflict?
I want one word about sports and impact.
Resilience. Today, I have decided to raise my voice to stop wars instead of empowering states to win them.
I don't want to be resilient. I hate resiliency because I don't need to be.
Being resilient means that the society has failed me. What if we end fragility for refugees? Thank you all.
Thank you to our closing panel. What a fitting end for 3 days where we discuss how we could do better, do more, and work together. I would like as well to thank the more than 5,000 people that have connected both either in person or online to join the discussion. I found this inspiring, and I hope that, like me, you're going back to your different countries' offices with that renewed sense of energy and how we will turn everything that we learn here into action. And last, but by no means least, allow me to thank the organizing team. They did a fantastic job. Some of them are here. They call me the fragile director, but I can tell you that I have the best team that one could dream of. Thank you.